Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Heather Krumpak with GradLeaders. So happy you could join us this afternoon. We are thrilled to have Matthew Temple leading today's conversation. He is the Senior Director of Alumni Career and Professional Development at the Kellogg School of Management. Real quickly, he's gonna, before we get started, if you could mute yourselves, that would be great, and then use the chat window to enter any questions, and Matthew will be happy to answer them all at the end of our half hour together. So Matthew, if you want to take it over, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Heather. It's great to see everyone joining us today. Looks like we've got people joining from the Kinkakuji Temple in Kyoto, Japan, and outer space, so I love that. So what I wanted to do today is just talk about some of our alumni career development virtual strategies in our changing world. And I thought what would be helpful at the beginning is just to sort of talk a little bit about just what our strategy is when we're in normal times at Kellogg. So at Kellogg, I run alumni career and professional development. And when we think about just overarching strategy, there's kind of three big pillars. You know, one is having alumni own their own careers. They've got to be in charge of it. They've got to be the CEO of their own career. No one's going to care more about their own careers except maybe their moms. But just, you know, really imbuing that in them at the very beginning, that they're the CEO of their own careers. You know, the second one is lifelong learning. How do we continue to help our alumni learn throughout the course of their life, whether that's continuing career development or professional development or even executive education. So lifelong learning is kind of another pillar. And then finally, how do we collaborate, create community, and create engagement with our alumni? And that's very easy to do in person, where we might have events and workshops, and now having to do more of that digitally. And how do we also engage them with the school? And that could be in terms of giving back to the school, hosting a career trek, listing jobs with the school, giving money back, being involved. And so that's a little bit around our strategy. If you think about in terms of different modes of engagement with alumni, we sort of go from one-to-one to one-to-many. So career coaching, you know, we're engaging one alum at a time. What's great about that is it's very high touch, but it's harder to scale. We also do a lot of job search groups and action circles at Kellogg, where we might be engaging groups of 6 up to 25 or even 30 alums. So some of the job search groups that we do in person in Chicago and New York will have even up to 30 people. We'll also do a lot of workshops to engage alumni. That can range from 25 to over 100 people. Webinars, you know, what can be 100 to over 1,000 people. And then finally a website where we're engaging even more people. And this is really an overview of how we are engaging with alumni. So there's free one-to-one career coaching. We'll do typically 3,000 coaching sessions a year. In the downturn in 2008 to 2010, we were probably peaking at over 5,000 coaching sessions a year. We do free job search groups and action circles. We do those in Chicago, New York. We also do virtual groups. We'll do 20 to 30 career workshops a year in about 10 different cities. 10 to 12 career and professional development webinars, basically one a month. 4,000 job board listings, reciprocal job listings. You can see free access to a lot of research tools, alumni resume database, access to Career Leader. And then we have a library of over 80 free videos and webinars to watch on demand. And obviously, that's something we've very much intentionally built up as a way to push alumni to resources that really can scale. And so actually, this is an overview of our team. So this is a little bit of our bigger team. These are all of our coaches who work with our working populations, which, you know, are defined as alumni, EMBA students, and part-time students. In terms of our team on the alumni side, it's roughly about 8 coaches, Regina, who makes all the trains run, and me all together. So you can see this is kind of what we were thinking about in spring and summer in terms of activity before coronavirus. We were going to do some workshops in Singapore. I was taking a group of our students for one of our classes to Cambodia, Vietnam, a lot of designing your life workshops in different cities around reunion, things like that. I even had a vacation planned. And then this happened, which changed things very dramatically. And then this happened. We weren't going to be flying around, and we were going to have to convert everything to virtual very quickly, as I'm sure all of you have had to do as well. And then inexplicably, this happened. I think I'm the only person who actually hasn't seen Tiger King, but that happened. And this is actually what I look like today as a result. So what are some of the themes from the new normal, that have come up and that we've seen? One of the things that's come up, really increased frequency of touch, or should I say non-touch points. We used to do in a normal world, we might do one webinar a month. We'd have a month to prepare it, put a really nice slide deck together, film it in the studio, have 2 or 3 IT people supporting us. That's gone out the window. So we're actually going out with much more increased frequency of touch points to alumni, which I think has been really, really important during the pandemic. We've also done a lot of social, not just career touch points. So even though our remit is really focused on careers, we've had a lot of our coaches, and I'll go into detail on a lot of these, running virtual happy hours for our alumni because it's been so important for them to connect, not just around careers, but just even socially and with each other. We're building out additional library sources. We are very lucky to have a phenomenal library that has built tons of just-in-time resources for alumni on working from home, leading remote teams, flexing part-time jobs, virtual interviewing, virtual networking, research reports. I think one of the other themes that came up is perfect is the enemy of good. And again, in that perfect world, I'd have a month to prepare a webinar. We're doing shorter webinars. We're doing them much more frequently. I think one of the things that's been very fun is everyone's really had the chance to experiment and prototype in real time, and it's okay to, if it's not perfect, and that's been great. And so even when you think about some of the webinars, typically it would have been an hour long. We're doing shorter webinars that might be half an hour or half an hour of content and 15 minutes of Q&A. So that shorter duration has worked well. One of the other things that was very fortunate was I was working on a peer group project this year at the university to really think about how do we increase self-directed learning and peer learning? How do we have alumni learn from each other? And that's been something we've really been able to operationalize in the short term because, as we think about the number of alumni that might be coming to us as they may lose jobs or need help, that's just been very timely to increase self-directed and peer learning. We're doing a lot of open sourcing. For a lot of the webinars we're doing, we're leaving them open for anyone to access, whether they went to Kellogg or not. It just sort of feels like it's a good time to be sharing resources, giving back to the community. So we've left most of our webinars open for anyone to use. One of the other interesting themes that has come up is just decentralized. Which is kind of interesting for my team. I actually work remotely. I live in LA and I've worked remotely for Kellogg for 10, 12 years, but my whole team is remote as well. We've got 2 people in New York, 2 in Atlanta, 1 in Charlotte, a couple in Chicago that work from home. So we were actually set up well for this to begin with. But what's also been really interesting, since we're not using a studio and everyone's kind of a producer at home with their Zoom account, we've really been able to ramp up our coaches participating and leading webinars and leverage more alumni into webinars. In the perfect world, even on a webinar, we still would have preferred people to be in the studio where the production quality is much better. But we've gone fully decentralized now. And then the other big theme that's really come up is just scale, scale, scale. And including across diverse populations. So typically, like if we're doing a digital program or a webinar, we would aim it primarily at alumni, but we'll open it up to other working professionals, which we've always done, to our MBA students, to our part-time evening and weekend students. But we've even opened it up to broader populations, including full-time students, staff, admitted students, even Northwestern, graduates, and just, wider audience. And so those are some of the themes that have come up from the new normal. These are just some of the webinars we've done the last 10 or 11 weeks. So we've done about 8 different webinars. This is a much, much faster pace than what we've done. We just sort of finished 5 webinars in 5 weeks. We're kind of catching our breath now. I think the new normal is probably going to be more like 2 webinars a month, which is a little bit more sustainable. I'll touch on some of them. One of our coaches did a really great webinar at the beginning of the pandemic. How do you cultivate resilience in challenging times? Another one that was, it's really interesting. It was very plain vanilla, leveraging alumni career resources, but was so helpful. We had one of our librarians, Francesca Martinez, take alumni through online. These are all of the resources available on our website. That was heavily attended webinar. One of the other webinars that we did was Ask Our Coaches panel, Job Searching in the Here and Now. And you can see the photo in the bottom right, 3 of our coaches, Ann Browning, Sarah Heisch, and Jill Falgren. And I think what was really nice about that is very real-time questions. Should you be networking right now? How should you be conducting your job search? If you're in a job right now, what should you be doing? And I think that panel format worked really well, where coaches are going to offer different nuggets, and there might even be some different points of view. And I think it was helpful for our audience to hear those slightly different points of view. One of the webinars, which I want to sort of build out, which we just did last week, was Disciplined Listening, Influence Under Stress, with Michael Reddington. I've actually put his contact information up. If you're looking for just a great webinar presenter, Michael is actually a certified forensic interviewer. He talked about how as a leader can you demonstrate authentic vulnerability in a time like this? How can you integrate business communication, forensic interviewing, research, and techniques? We had over 1,100 registrants at that webinar. So if you're interested at all, I've just put up Michael's contact details. Don't hesitate to reach out. And we can actually send out a link to a webinar that he's doing tomorrow if you want to hear more, or even sending out the link to the webinar that he did for us last week. In terms of our webinar registration, we've run from 700 up to about 1,400. So a lot of alumni have really been coming. And then every webinar will typically record and post it. And turnaround time has been super fast. So we've had recordings up the next day. And again, what's great about that is it scales. And we've been encouraging more alumni to register, even if they can't attend, then it's very quick for us to get that link to them, to the recording. Some upcoming webinars that we're doing, Optimizing Body, Mind, and Spirit in a Fast-Paced World. We just set the date today. It's going to be June 17th. And pictured here is Megan Lyons, who's a Kellogg alum, who's going to talk about that. We're going to do another Ask Our Coaches panel, focusing on job search for over 50s, onboarding, preparing for video interviews, happiness, creativity, virtual ideation workshop. And typically our webinar presenters have been a mix of our team. It's also been a mix of some faculty and a mix of alumni and other presenters as well. In addition, we've done a number of executive education webinars, and my group doesn't do these. It's done by Exec Ed, but it's been really great as well to send these out to alumni as resources to hear from different faculty leaders on just different things to be thinking about during the pandemic, whether it's crisis management fundamentals, work, love, and relationships, the new art of virtual collaboration. And again, continuing with that same theme at Kellogg, we've open sourced this. These are open for anyone to access. They don't have to have gone to Kellogg. And I think it's just a time to really make resources available and be helpful to everyone, whether really an alum of the school or not. In terms of upcoming things, I was trained in Designing Your Life at Stanford 2 years ago, and we presented the workshop in 10 to 12 cities globally over the last 2 years. It's a 2.5-hour long workshop, and it's typically a workshop that really thrives in person. There's a ton of interaction, a ton of networking. We're going to go out with our first virtual one on June 11th. We're prototyping it in Chicago for alumni. We had 65 places available. The email went out Sunday night. All 65 were filled up on Monday. We increased capacity a little bit. So I think that's a workshop we'll be doing for more alumni. And again, we're going to use breakout rooms, which Regina is going to be running to put alumni in. So it's actually going to be a great way for alumni to network and meet other alumni, I think in a very, very comfortable environment. And so I think that's something we'll continue to roll out after the first prototype. We've also been doing, I talked about how we've been connecting with alumni on both the career side, but also the social side. So our coaches have been connecting with over 200 alumni to date, essentially hosting virtual happy hours. So at Kellogg, we call them TGs when they're students. Thank God it's Friday. And that's been great. And it's interesting, it's been great for alumni who may be on their own in the pandemic, single, not with a family. But we've also noticed even those with families, they want to leave their family just for an hour to talk with people outside of their family. It's been a great connection point. And I think even our coaches have really enjoyed it as well, as a way for them to connect with alumni. And next up, we're really looking at how do we facilitate some industry networking. And we're just going to roll out with something on that probably in the next month. And then as well, starting to facilitate and roll out virtual job search groups. So we've actually been doing virtual groups for probably 8 or 9 years, but the group size has been limited to really 6 to 8 people. It has to be carefully choreographed. When I think about the importance of scaling, we're really planning to scale these up to 25 alumni per group. We're getting ready to prototype the first group in the Bay Area. So it'll be a group that meets once a week, 90 minutes per session, 4 weeks all together. One of my other coaches, Jill Falgren, and I will facilitate the group. Reg will run the breakout rooms and the technical things. And typically we're going to be using the Zoom platform to do this. But again, I think this comes back to our big theme of peer learning. How do you learn and partner with your peers in a job search group? Looking for a job is not a lot of fun. It's less fun in a pandemic. I think it's nicer when you're going through that experience with a peer group versus on your own. And so we're getting close to getting those set up for the larger Zoom groups. And that's really it for the content. So let me stop sharing and why don't we open it up for questions. And Heather, if you want to, you can look in the chat box, but if you want to start with some of the questions.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you so much. So the first one kind of goes back to the beginning where you were talking about the interaction and was asking to clarify, were the 3,000 appointments alumni only that you mentioned?
Yes.
Taking appointments? Yeah,
so those are actually alumni only. We used to actually have more appointments with alumni than we did with current students. So we peaked, 10 years ago at 5,100, 5,200, and clearly that wasn't sustainable. And so we had to put in a 5-hour limit for one-on-one coaching with alumni. And we've just started to do more groups, but those 3,000 one-on-one, that's just on the alumni side alone.
All right, thank you. The next one says, can you share what peer learning has looked like?
I think that peer learning, it's come about primarily in our job search groups and in our workshops. Even in the Designing Your Life workshop, there's a lot of peer learning because you'll debrief exercises in dyads or in smaller groups. And so a lot of the peer learning comes from that. And a lot of the peer learning also comes in the job search groups where you're in a group with 25 other people and you're learning from them and you're keeping people accountable and supporting. So when you think about the things that people are going to get out of that peer learning, how do you help keep people accountable for getting their goals? If I had to bring a company list, why didn't you bring yours? How do you support people? But also, how do you trade job leads? How do you trade networking leads? And in the Zoom groups, we're going to keep them in groups as a way to network and learn and stay together as a group.
Thanks, Matthew. That actually leads to the next question. There's a few questions with regards to Zoom. You mentioned it a few times. Is that the only platform you're using for the job search groups, the webinars, all of the interaction? Are you doing it on Zoom? And if so, is that how you're tracking all your viewership and attendance as well?
It's a great question. So the university, Northwestern, had really just made the decision to switch to Zoom right before the pandemic. So we actually just switched on to Zoom. It was great timing, like, March 1 was when we started using it. Before that, we had used, as an enterprise license, Blue Jeans. We had done webinars on Livestream and WebEx and even Adobe Connect way back, but we're really using Zoom now. And one thing to clarify is there's two different Zoom platforms to think about. So one is like a Zoom license like this, where anyone can talk and they have to mute themselves. And that's great when we're doing a workshop and I need people to speak and interact. So like for that, I would use my personal Northwestern Zoom license, where we can have up to 300 people. When we're doing a webinar and we may be having, 1,000 people or up to 3,000 people, for that, we're actually using a Zoom webinar platform where everyone is muted and can't unmute, or pandemonium will break out. You'll see potato chip bags opening, cats and dogs barking, children crying. So it really depends on what you're doing. For a large webinar, we'll use that Zoom webinar platform. Those are more expensive. And as a school, we have 3 licenses to use those.
Great. The next 2 I will combine. It says, do you maintain your own alumni contact information, or do you have to collaborate with other departments on campus? Along with, I guess, around the alumni contact info, someone's asking, how many weeks in advance are you marketing your webinars in the new normal?
Yeah, great. So great questions both. I think like most of you, we do not own the email list for our alumni. So when we are promoting a program, whether it's a workshop or a webinar, we have to go through alumni relations. And so in other words, I put the message and the text together, the email, but they have to send it out. One of the challenges sometimes is getting in the queue, because if there's an email going out from the dean or from development or from exec ed or other areas, we have to get a place in the queue. There hasn't been as much going out, so that's been easier during the pandemic, but that's always something we have to negotiate, and we have to build in that time whenever we're planning an event. In terms of the lead time for marketing a webinar, it's never been a huge lead time. So even pre-pandemic, we might push a webinar out, I think in the best of worlds, it's 2 weeks ahead of time, but we can do it a week ahead of time. And because typically it's a 1-hour commitment, you're not driving anywhere, you're doing it from home, that 1 week advance is typically fine for webinars. And again, we're recording and posting, 98% of all of our webinars. So even if someone misses it, they'll be able to see it anyway.
All right, thanks, Matthew. Next one, lots of interest around your job search groups and Kellogg Action Circles. So can you give a little bit more explanation around the difference between the two? And then specifically they ask about the content, or is it created content, or is it open discussion for both the Kellogg Action Circles as well as the job search groups?
For the job search groups in particular, it's it's almost like a class. I mean, and again, no differently than what all of you would do. So it may start with self-assessment and, what's your brand, what's your marketing plan, help with your resume, your LinkedIn profile, getting ready for interviews. So a lot of the nuts and bolts is typically what we'll go over in a job search group. And again, it's almost like a class with the curriculum. In the action circles, we've primarily done action circles around particular demographics. So it could even be returning to the workforce and having an action circle around that. And that may be a little bit more open discussion versus a set curriculum. We still may pull parts from that set curriculum, but it's probably more of less choreographed and less scripted. So we've had action circles around that. We've had action circles around over 50s in a job search. And I think that, if I think about those two demographics, it can give a much greater level of comfort. Sometimes confidence can be a big issue for people returning to the workforce. And so then being in a cohort of like-minded people can make it a more comfortable experience.
Terrific. Couple more questions here in the chat. With regards to your career coaches that are working remotely, are they employees of Northwestern or are they independent contractors?
Great question. So it's actually a mix of both, but it is primarily independent contractors. That being said, many of them, several of them had worked at Kellogg and now are focused on alumni and working as an independent contractor. So they have a ton of knowledge about the school and it feels seamless. Many of our coaches were alumni. And I think that, again, it makes it feel very seamless. They have the credibility of having gone through the program, having worked in MBA careers. They're certified as coaches. So we're primarily independent contractors. And, and it's also not, it's not 8 FTEs because some are working, part-time, 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, and some it may be closer to full-time. So it's really a mix.
Okay. Well, and with that being said, can you clarify the 5-hour limit for coaching? Is that 5 1-hour sessions that are available to each alumnus? Is that per year or in a lifetime?
Sure, great question. So it's per year. And obviously, if someone runs into difficulty, we can be flexible. So it's not, like a set line, but in general, we want to follow that. So it's 5 hours per year. It can be up to 10 half-hour sessions because sometimes someone may only need a half-hour session. We don't want to go below half an hour. So that session length might range from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. If someone is in a job search group, we don't count that towards their total. So that, doesn't count at all. So, you could be in a job searching group and have an additional 10 hours of working in a coach in some format.
Sure. If they take full advantage of all your resources you're putting together for them. The next one is, how do you seek feedback on all of these events that you're creating for alumni, or do you?
We do. So we will survey after workshops, after webinars, after coaching appointments. We want to be responsive, and we know that we want to get better. So, we want to get feedback and see what can we be doing better. So we will send out surveys. We'll track NPS scores. Our NPS scores have, I think we were averaging 74 to 80. So NPS scores have been, extraordinarily high for coaches. When you figure 60 is usually considered really good, they've done really well. And that feedback is important. So for instance, when we do our first virtual design of your life next week, I'm going to try to get a focus group together of people who can stay afterwards, because I know it'll be good, but I also know there's going to be 20 things we can do better. And so that feedback is going to be really critical. So we're going to do a survey, but we'll also have some focus groups to really get actionable feedback.
All right, thanks, Matthew. So what online recommendations do you have with regards to interview preparation tools?
It's really good. One of the things that I've got to do in the short term is just I'm going to probably just make a quick 10-minute video on, top 10 tips for virtual interviewing. And we do have a number of them that our librarians have put together. I can pull some of those and send it out. But the biggest things that, I'm going to start with is just lighting. Look at the difference, with just like a good light. This is a $10 IKEA lamp, but, starting with lighting and backgrounds, but we'll go through like kind of top 10 tips, but we can send out those resources.
Well, and to that end, to folks on the call, in addition to the webinar recording and the PowerPoint that Matthew is willing to share, a lot of the resources he mentioned that he provides to Kellogg are free if people know where to look. A lot of the recordings he mentioned and are available. So Matthew and I will put together a list of all those resources that are widely available. People just don't know they're out there, and we'll send that as a follow-up to this webinar. So I'll get all of these great resources that Matthew's mentioned that you guys can have available to you as well. So we'll send that as a follow-up to this discussion. Lastly, at least in the chat, it says, are you doing anything extra special for our 2020 graduates, extra benefits, outreach, to make them feel welcome to the alumni party?
That's very timely. We were just emailing about that today. So we may do some dedicated job search groups and groups for those 2020s. We are probably going to be much more flexible with that 5-hour limit, it is going to be a more challenging time. So we are definitely looking into that right now.
Well, Matthew, that is a perfect way to wrap up our 30 minutes together. That ends all of our chat questions. Thank you to everyone that was able to join us. Matthew, I think this comment says it the best, which is you're so awesome and so very generous with all of your knowledge. So we appreciate it. So we will gather all of these good tips and resources and send them out to everyone. So Matthew, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye.